Hello, we're here with Grandmaster Jesse Kraai of the San Francisco Mechanics. This is FM Mike Klein reporting for the United States Chess League. Jesse, how are you this morning?
Good.
Great, great. I understand we're coming to you from Portland. Are you on a little vacation now?
Right, this is my first time to Portland. I've always wanted to come, but since there's been very few chess tournaments in Portland throughout my life, I've never actually had a chance. So here I am.
Right, I believe there was the National Elementary there many, many years ago, but well after your time in Scholastic Chess. Now, this this past week in the USCL, you had a somewhat rare appearance on board too, but you made the most of it. You won as black in only 25 moves. Was it as easy as it looked?
Um, well, I feel like I made a couple of creative decisions, and I think my opponent kind of fell apart. I don't think I played especially creatively, but I did make a couple good moves. But other than that, I can't claim too much credit. um, so yeah, it was kind of easy, but sometimes people make mistakes, and then the game can fall apart very quickly, and that's part of the game, I guess.
Now, you led with your bishop on h2. Was there any danger of anything bad happening to that bishop?
There was a lot of danger with the bishop h2. I saw that variation coming, and I thought intuitively it was going to work, but I wasn't at all sure it was going to work, and that was the decision that was the most critical. Um, and when he played queen e2 and I could take on h4 and trade the thing off, I knew I was going to be at least better. Um, there were critical variations of the bishop e7, and I don't know if your viewers are going to have a board in front of them, but the problem with bishop e7 was I knew I could take it with the knight on c6 and be okay, but he was also threatening bishop d6. See, when my queen's on f4, and I didn't even see that at first. So that was one of those moves like from behind where sometimes you don't know if it's a kind of move that you can miss.
Yeah, I actually wasn't sure about bishop e7 either. I knew that when you took it, a lot of his pieces would be, not en prise necessarily, but it seemed like something was up your sleeve. So, but I guess we'll never know. Now, in the game, it was an isolated queen pawn, and we all know the maxims about how to play for and against. But I'm curious, did you always know that you were going to have enough activity for the IQP, or was it just intuition, perhaps?
Well, I think that variation is a little bit worse for black. Years ago, Kudrin played a very nice game against me and won, and I was traumatized by that and haven't played it since. But I thought it was a good choice in this game. I think it's a good choice against young tactical players because they have to be kind of long-sighted about where they put their pieces. And also, just it's hard to understand the positional nuances of controlling the dark squares around the QP. Um, and so I like the position. It's very solid for black. Black is a little bit worse though at the beginning. No question about it.
Now, when your d pawn finally advanced, that's usually a sign of strategic success for the person with the isolated queen pawn. I was going to ask you if you felt like you were better at that point, but it sounds like you thought you were better even before then.
Um, well, right, actually, well, when I took on h4, the problem was then he's lost like, you're absolutely right in seeing it as the advance of the d-pawn, and what happens in that variation is that he's lost the control over the d4 square, right? And so not only do I lost the control of the d4 square, then the d3 square is something I control too. Now, I don't know if maybe because we're older chess players, Mike, but we're talking in metaphysical terms, like the young kids. I don't think the way we do, but at least the way I'm hearing you speak, you're speaking in my old time ways, where you talk about the advance of the isolated queen pawn and its lust to expand, and all these things, and a lot of times we're not as much better as we think we are. But in that game, I think it was true that the old time principles applied.
That's funny to hear you say that. So, are you suggesting that younger players aren't instilled with these sort of maxims that we just take for granted?
No. Book, right? This is like my system. This is like something you learn in a book in chess practice and talking about uh, like the control of the dark squares around the isolated queen pawn, which is a light square, and the need to trade off, like, say, your light square bishop because it doesn't even talk to the dark squares. All these things are they're kind of metaphysical, and maybe they're even strange and weird and old timey. but they're something I grew up with, and they are the way I think about the game.
Now, did you study metaphysics a lot? I know you've got your doctorate in philosophy.
Um, well, I guess so. I feel like metaphysical questions are around us all the time, whether they're in the guise of philosophy or something else. Um, and I think even if you haven't read Nimzovich, you'll end up coming up with a set of value judgments on your own about what should happen in certain positions. And in a way, that's a kind of metaphysics. It's a guide for you to uh, have a sense of values when you're going into a position where you have really no idea what's going on.
It sounds like you take great enjoyment in comparing the world of chess with the world around us.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's chess has been a part of my life, and the world around us is a part of everyone's life. And I do think that as chess players, one of the interesting things we're doing is we're trying to uh, do something in chess that we haven't been able to do in life. In life, we never have the transparency of the chessboard. We never get to see all the pieces in front of us. We don't get to see who our opponent is. And life mishandles us, and we can't see anything with clarity. And so on the chessboard, even though we can often get things wrong, we at least know what they were, or we can see them. We can see the pieces moving against us. And in life, we never have that opportunity.
And how do you reconcile those two worlds? One where much is known and there's definitely an outcome and there's a winner and a loser, and life where you can never tell if you're a winner or a loser. Is there a particular world you prefer?
Well, chess is definitely a beautiful world, and it's a world of escape. Um, and I suppose I've definitely preferred it at various points in my life.
I see now. I understand you're not preferring it now. You're on a bit of an over-the-board chess hiatus. What are you up to these days?
So I'm writing a book, and it's still I haven't left the chess world because the book is about someone's education within the chess world, and in a lot of ways has to do with these questions I'm bringing up now. Uh, so it's about my own education in the chess world in a sense, and what I see others going through, what it would mean to become a good chess player, and what it would mean to then go out into the world, and how you would see the world, and how your chess experiences determine who you are. And that's a lot about what I'm interested in pursuing in the book. I'm also, interested in talking about how we're socialized as chess players. Like you are a little bit younger than me, but also brought up in the chess world, and what kind of people we met, and how those people, what the stories they told us, how those stories informed who we were. And that's kind of what I'm trying to write about too.
I see. So is the book autobiographical?
No, no, I do have to channel certain bits of my own memory, but it's definitely not autobiographical. The protagonist is a young girl, and she is obviously both a girl and not of my generation. So there's definite differences.
And any of the characters in the book, will we be able to tell with certainty who they're modeled after, or are they just amalgams of people that you've met along your chess travels?
I think the clearest person that people will recognize is I modeled her teacher after Igor Ivanov, who died a couple years ago. And the premise of his character is kind of interesting. At least it was interesting to me, and your listeners will know that Igor was traveled throughout the states and had a drinking problem, but really was a beautiful player, and also someone who is interested in math and music and literature. And the premise of his character in my book is, who would have Igor been if he could have stopped drinking at some point, maybe 2002, and tried to survive? And what would he have had to have done to have survived? Um, and part of that survival for him, I think, is teaching this girl.
Right now, the captain of the San Francisco Mechanics, John Donaldson, was largely responsible for getting Igor Ivanov his grandmaster title post mortem. But we all seem to think of his name. We think of alcohol first. But tell us some other things. Are there any good stories about Igor you can relate to the viewers that only know him for his alcohol problems?
Well, you know, maybe you have similar experiences, but as a chess player, the alcohol problem, it wasn't, it was weird because you would show up and he would be completely roasted at the board, and it would be like the last round, and you're tense and nervous, and you're playing this guy, and he's better than you, and he's like from this other country, and he talks funny, and you're just a kid, and you're trying to prove yourself, and he looks at you with these shark eyes through these like broken glasses. He's clearly like fallen down some hotel stairs or something. He's bandaged to get them together with tape, and he's got these shark eyes, and they're looking right at you, and you don't know what's going on. He's just drunk as hell. He might even fall asleep during the game, but you're never going to beat him. He's always going to crush you. I remember about Igor Ivanov.
Well, if stories like that make it into your book, I'm sure you're going to sell a lot of copies of Chess Players because he was quite a character, and I've got a few stories of my own. But mostly, he was an affable player that he'll be sorely missed. Well, back to the USCL for a minute. Your teammate on board one, Grandmaster Vinay Bhatt, he hasn't played nearly as much as you this season. Is there any reason for that?
Well, so Vinay and I lived together at the GM house, and kind of a similar time when I started writing this book, and the GM house disbanded at that point. That was like May 2010. He went off and got a job in the South Bay doing market research related stuff, and he's very good at that. And I hope he gets paid quite a bit. He'll never admit how much he's getting paid. So he's gone off and left the chess world probably more or less completely, um, at least for a long while, and to pursue his career. So I don't get to see Vinay nearly as often as I'd like to, though I still have his rice cooker from the GM house, and that always gives me solace because I cook out of the thing often.
Now, do chess players make good roommates? I mean, do they clean up after themselves?
Oh, I think it's varies. I think men in general are poor roommates, and chess players often happen to be men. Vinay was always meticulously clean. Um, yeah, I thought though the GM house itself was a beautiful experience, and I don't really have any complaints about the people there in terms of how they lived or how slovenly they were.
Now, I know you live a little more simply than most. Has the appeal of a 9 to 5 job that pays very well, has it just never been something you've been interested in?
Well, yeah, not so much. I guess I'm more interested in the creative projects I might want to do. So right, I don't have a car and I don't spend a lot of money. I try to stay reasonably healthy. Um, but the main thing is I'm just trying to do what I want to do in life, and at the moment, it's trying to finish this book. And it's totally possible that after that, I could maybe get a real job or do something more fitting to the world. But at the moment, right, I've lived a very austere lifestyle for years, and I needed that lifestyle in order to get the GM title as well. I needed to not have to make a lot of money teaching kids, for example, um, in order to do that. And when I was an IM, that was a real problem because I had to travel to all these tournaments to try to get the norms, and that was kind of expensive in itself.
Yes, I know when I won my first big tournament in high school, I went out and bought a car, and my coach told me I'll never be a grandmaster because no grandmaster drives a sports car like I had. So I can sympathize. Now, you said you like to stay healthy. I know you love to bike. It seems like your biggest passion away from chess and writing. Do you bike to matches at the Mechanics Institute, or do you take public transportation?
Someday I will bike to a match at the Mechanics Institute. At the moment, we have a bridge being built. It's being remodeled still after the 1989 earthquake, and it does not allow bikes across the bridge, and it's a big political issue in the Bay Area. But someday that'll be open, and I'll ride the bike over.
Right, I think that was the Bay Bridge earthquake during the World Series. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And are you watching the Giants play this year?
Well, as a chess player, I'm usually very arrogant towards sports. I don't think they are as interesting as chess, and they're kind of flat and don't have a lot of nuance. But it's funny with the Giants, everyone gets so excited. And like me in the Bay Area, no one really cares about sports. But once someone starts winning and they have beards and they look really cool, then we'll get into it. And so once every couple of years, I'll end up rooting for some baseball team.
Well, it sounds like a good time to start. Now, I know that you do century rides all the time. It's pretty standard for you. But you might be the only grandmaster I know of to bike as long as you have after a tournament. Can you tell us about what you did in Canada a few years ago?
Right, so I played my last, it was really my last competitive chess tournament. I think that was May 2011, and it was in Calgary. And I'd heard about this road that you could go on, and this got all of these glaciers. Right, the Rocky Mountains are just west of Calgary, maybe about 60 miles, and these beautiful glaciers that you can go and ride along, and there's all kinds of hostels hidden in the woods that you can stay at. And so I rented a bike after the tournament, and I rode the bike out there and spent about 5 days going from like little hostel to little hostel. It was a really beautiful experience. It was kind of cold at times. It was like May, so there was still a little bit of precipitation happening. But I bundled myself up, and it was just one of the most beautiful experiences I'll always remember.
Well, I'm amazed you can bike in the Canadian Rockies after playing a long invitational tournament, but very, very impressive. Now, going back to your college years, you went over to Europe and got your doctorate in philosophy, as we said before. Um, do the two disciplines coincide, chess and philosophy? Does writing an argumentative paper coincide with the type of thinking chess players undergo?
Well, in a way, I'd like to hope it does. I think there was a time in the history of the game when there was that connection was more prominent, in particular when the German players were dominant in the late 19th, early 20th century, um, where that seemed kind of like a natural connection to be interested in philosophy and chess, and now there are fewer players who do that. But I think inherently there's a lot of philosophical thinking that goes on in the chess world, and I think even players who don't want to think about chess that way, like I said, they end up thinking about it anyway. And I think it makes chess more interesting when we start examining our presumptions about the position and why we think certain ways. And once we start examining why we think about certain ways about certain positions, I think we start realizing that we do have these assumptions. And our assumptions can actually be improved. We can work on our assumptions and how we think about positions. Um, and those will help us become, I think, not just better chess players, but more interesting people.
Yeah, now, a lot of chess literature written in the last few years has centered on this idea of how we think and not just the moves themselves. Can you tell us any books that particularly are interesting reads?
I've been mostly disappointed with chess literature recently. Maybe a book that I read that I thought it needed to be rewritten, but I thought it had a lot of interesting ideas was The Seven Deadly Chess Sins by Jonathan Rowson. I thought that had some nice things, and unfortunately, I feel like that book it just needed to be rewritten for like another 6 months or something to really bring it out. But I thought that had some interesting ideas in it. But other than that, I'm waiting for suggestions from people like you as to what I should read in terms of chess books.
Well, I'm afraid that's one of my favorites. So the fact that you think he could have made it even better is saying a lot. But hopefully, you'll be able to write one yourself one day. What about chess players? Are there any players you've analyzed with, perhaps after the game with them, that you really enjoyed that analysis session? And we're back with Grandmaster Jesse Kraai. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We were just talking about chess books, and he was giving us his views on philosophy and metaphysics. I'm curious, Jesse, are there any top players that you've had postmortem analysis sessions with that you really enjoyed their way of describing their thinking process?
Yeah, I think the Russians I've analyzed with, I've discovered through talking with them a little bit of the chess culture that made them strong. At the GM House, we had the honor of bringing in GMs Mikalevsky and Lev Sakis, and those guys really had some interesting thoughts about the game, and they have brought a culture to the game, which I'm generally not exposed to when I'm just hanging around American players. So for me, that was very interesting to have lessons with those guys, and I think it is a cultural thing where they have, in a sense, a language to talk about chess that we don't have, or maybe you could say we're developing, that we have to develop it as English speaking or American players, and they have it and we have to steal it from them.
It sounds Cold War era-esque. I thought there were no more secrets in chess after the internet started, but
Well, you would think, right? You'd think like, oh, it's just this open thing, but if you think about chess as, there being questions of value at play, it's also a question of language and how you approach and talk about the game. I think that might be the simplest way to talk about it. Instead of saying, you could talk about it being metaphysical, but really, it's just, do you have a vocabulary to talk about certain positions? And approaches to certain positions. And if you do, you'll be able to find your way in a complex position more readily than if you don't.
well, speaking of vocabulary, you've added a little bit to the Chess Urban Dictionary by coining a few nicknames. What is your fascination with nicknames, by the way, when it comes to chess players?
Well, I realized recently that, you know, I have a poor memory for names, and maybe chess players in general suffer from this. And I think I was giving nicknames not only to be fun, but to help me remember these names, right? Especially Americans, have the same names like Mike and Eric and all these other names we hear 1,000 times, and I have a hard time keeping them apart. And so I think uh, giving nicknames is in a way a survival strategy for me. And some people are offended by the nicknames I've given other people, so I try to do it sparingly now. But but I think every chess player eventually gets a nickname, right? Like Ivanchuk is clearly Chucky. I didn't name him that. Someone came up with that, and that's just his nickname from now on. Or Nakamura is Naka. That's just clear. Shanklin will probably always be Shanky. He might grow older, and someone else will, the nickname might change, but those nicknames will all stick. Um, you know, Shabalov. To me, I guess I called him the Shaba. Other people, have different names for him, but he's such a magisterial, otherworldly presence that the Shaba seems to fit. It sounds a little bit like Shabbos, you know.
Yes, the Jewish Sabbath. Now,
Yeah,
which nickname are you most proud of that has stuck?
I'm not particularly proud of any of them. When we played this great tournament in China in 2008, and it had just been the Olympics, and the panda was all over the place. And I was rooming with Josh Riddell, and he was sleeping all the time. And so I called him the panda, and that of all the nicknames seems to be the one that stuck the most. Um, and I think sometimes he enjoys the nickname, and sometimes he doesn't. And so, in the times he doesn't enjoy the nickname, I feel a little regretful that I gave him the nickname. But that's probably the one that stuck, that was the most idiosyncratic, I suppose.
And of course, the rule with nicknames is that you can't give yourself one. Somebody else has got to do it. So,
That's right.
has
Yeah.
anybody given you one?
Well, the pandas tried to give me all kinds of nicknames, but the other rule with the nickname is it kind of has to stick, and I can't determine if it sticks. And it only sticks if other people kind of think to themselves, oh, yeah, that makes sense as a nickname, and that's what I'm going to call this person.
So, while it's not up to you, which nickname that's a possibility to stick would you be, most proud of? Mhm.
Of a nickname that I could give
Well,
somebody?
no, no, no. I'm saying which nickname is most apt to describe you
Oh,
that Josh
oh.
Friedel has tried out.
Well, we played years and years ago. I played in the under 21 championship, and we watched Star Wars. This is the U.S. Under 21 Championship. This was many years ago. And we watched Star Wars as kind of like a lark one evening, and they started calling me Chewbacca. And I thought, of all nicknames, that was probably the closest, you know, to who I am.
But
Like,
Chewbacca is very hirsute, and I'm sorry to say, Jesse, that that's not one of your more defining features.
Oh, you haven't seen me with my shirt off. I've got some hirsute. I have some real hirsute. I'm like a silverback.
Well, we're not going to take the interview that far, but I will leave it to some other people to confirm or deny that.
Okay.
Well, in closing, you've got a lot of interests. You're at one of the top echelons of chess, but you're involved in a lot of other things. What would you prefer to be known as in 10 years? A writer, a philosopher, or a chess player?
Oh, I don't. I think one peculiarity with me is I don't really feel a calling in any of those fields. I like to study, and all of those things involve time with myself alone thinking. Um, Perhaps I would like to be known as someone who's thought about various things in life and has meditated on them, hopefully deeply, and allowed people to have their own questions about how to approach these things or encourage them.
When you're on these long bike rides, do you ever think about chess?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think about everything on the long bike ride.
Do you ever have to pull over to get a pocket chess set out and look at something?
No, but that's a thought. That's a thought.
Well, I'm waiting for the day that you produce a novelty that you can tell me you thought about in the 80th mile of your bike ride. That would be something. Uh,
Well, then, Mike, we'll go on a bike ride together, and we'll create that thing together.
that sounds great. I look forward to it. It's been very interesting talking to you, Jesse, and enjoy the rest of your vacation. We look forward to seeing if the mechanics can climb back into the playoffs. You guys are only a half game out, and got a big match up coming this week against Seattle. We will see if Akobian plays a second week in a row. I'm sure you got to get back to your studies.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jesse. Bye bye.
Bye.
Before we